Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here with us today. I'm Riccardo Spani, researcher at FEM, and welcome to the 4th annual conference on methodologies and tools to evaluate the financial impact of climate-related risks and opportunity. Today, I am with Arianna Lovera, Senior Program Officer at the Italian Sustainable Investment Forum, Matthew Marine, CEO of Iceberg Data Lab, Leonard Schwezer, economist at Right Based on Science, Ian Stannard, Senior Engagement Manager at Agentum. These will be the speakers of the first session, entitled on measuring the financial impacts on climate-related risks. Our guests for the virtual roundtable instead are Anne-Claire Abadi, Portfolio Manager, SRI and Environmental Specialist at Sycamore Asset Management, Manuela Mazzoleni, Direttrice Sostenibilità at Assogestioni, and Riccardo Tedesco, Advisory ESG Product Specialist at Nordea Investment Funds. After this roundtable, I'll give you a little bit of structure on how the conference works. There will be a Q&A session with the attendees. You can write the questions in the question section of the panel on your right, and at the end there will be concluding remarks by Sergio Vergalli, Program Director at Fondazione Enrico Mattei. As I said, this is the 4th annual conference on methodologies and tools for assessing, measuring, and quantifying the financial impact of climate-related risks and opportunities. And as I said, we have 2 sessions. The first one is dedicated to the instruments and approaches developed for calculating this kind of impact, while a roundtable will be dedicated to the discussion on the utility of these kind of methodologies and approaches, and how financial practitioners typically may benefit from the application of these methodologies. I do not want to occupy too much time, so I will be leaving the floor to Arianna Lovera from Italian Sustainable Investment Forum, which is our partner in organizing this event as it is inscribed within the Sustainable and Responsible Investment Week. Please, Arianna, you may close it. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Riccardo, and also thank to Fondazione Enrico Mattei for having organized this webinar. We are very pleased to host it within the 10th edition of the Italian SRI Week, the main initiative in Italy focused on sustainable finance. So, of course, the topic of the webinar today is of paramount importance for the financial sector, as demands for disclosures on climate-related risks and opportunities are increasing, also as a consequence of the European legal framework, and in particular of the introduction of SFDR. We, as ITASIF, we have recently released a short video on the importance of the integration of climate-related issues into investment decisions aimed at retail investors that are who are, broadly speaking, less aware of these issues, these topics, compared to institutional ones. And we as ITASIF, we also stress the importance of not only of climate-related risks and opportunities, but also of the impacts that are associated with financial products and services, as finance is not a neutral tool, but on the contrary can steer the economy and the society towards a more sustainable model. And another point we stress usually is the importance to include in also social aspects while addressing climate change, as the necessary transition, the ecological transition to a new climate neutral economy must be a just transition, therefore providing opportunities for the workers in the high emitting sectors for reskilling, re-employment, and also a just transition that equally distribute the benefits of the transition, for instance, while creating not only green jobs, but decent green jobs. We are very glad that Fondazione Eni and Enrico Mattei continue working on these aspects. Now I will give the floor to Ricardo again. I would like just to invite you to follow the upcoming events of the SRI Week, and in particular the closing event, where we will celebrate our 20th anniversary and discuss on future perspectives, challenges and opportunities of sustainable finance in Italy. Thank you again, and please, Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arianna. Thank you again, everyone, for being here with us. Let me just remind and thank the Italian Sustainable Investment Forum and Chapter Zero Italy for supporting us, and obviously our partners, Saipem, Madue, Acea, ANRA Generali, Unipol 6, and Util Italia, which are constantly supporting us in our dissemination activity, which we conduct alongside the research activity we conduct here in Fondazione Eni e Enrico Mattei. Without spending more time on this, I will leave the floor to Mathieu Maurin, CEO at Iceberg Data Lab, for the first speech. I remind you have 20 minutes of time for presenting, and I will give you a sign when time is almost up. So let me allow you as a presenter. You should now be able to share your screen, Mathieu.
Excellent. So do you see a slideshow entitled Iceberg Data Lab presentation to film seminar?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. So thank you for that introduction, and I want to thank the Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei to provide us with the opportunity to introduce Iceberg Data Lab and our climate-related approach, and to show several different approaches to see, I would say, the breadth of expertise and research which is put into that important topic. So what I will do today is to very briefly introduce you to our company, and then provide you an overview of what we do in relation with climate, focusing on two issues, which are the footprint and the score, so the temperature, and well, share with you some thoughts about our methodology and how we are different, and why we work like we do with a product-based approach. So first thing first, Iceberg. So we are a fintech, meaning that we work on two legs: a tech team to leverage on the ocean of structured and unstructured data, which is a big difference between the way an ESG data provider can work today and 10 years ago. It's access to information. It's way broader, but that information is not necessarily reported directly by the company, or reported in what we call a structured format, meaning easy to collect and extract. And the second leg is a research team which have worked on our climate model, on which I will elaborate further, but also biodiversity data, and holistic green score. We have a diversified franchise, as you see, balanced towards European asset owner, asset manager, institution in the UK, in the US, and so on. And we are independent. We are based in France. We don't work for corporates, for issuers, and the management is the main shareholder of the company. We are involved in three main thematics: climate, biodiversity, and holistic green score. When it comes to climate, we have three main KPIs: the footprint, the temperature, and the transition risk score and their monetarization. I will focus today on the footprint and on the temperature, but I'll be happy to follow up with any interested on the following layer, which is how that translates into a risk score. What we provide is reporting. You need a climate reporting, we provided. Is data feed, you need a database to produce your own reporting or to design a bespoke climate fund like it was done by Amundi, by Fulcrum in the UK. It's possible, or portfolio analysis tool, or more custom approach. So now I will spend more time and especially quite some time explaining you why we decided to work at product level. The core of our model is what is called an input-output model, which basically models the physical flows of the company. Its purchase throughout its value chain, including the supply chain, and its sales, including the downstream use of products sold, scope 3 category according to the GHG protocol. And we model up to 1,200 different products: meat, beef, ethylene, 200 soft commodities, leather shoes, electrical bicycles, and so on and so on and so on which, thanks to LCA database, we calculate environmental pressures, on which we calculate environmental impact scores. Excuse me. Environmental impact scores, which are related to climate, biodiversity, temperature, brown share, and so on and so on and so on. So that's a multi-layered approach, and through one model and one calculation, we consistently can calculate a footprint, and then a temperature, and then a transition risk score, and then tomorrow, if need be, a biodiversity, if that's possible. So now on some slide, I will explain. I will focus on the model is, I think, quite straightforward. You have an output and you apply to it a level of pollution, basically, based on scientific database. Now I will explain why, because we are very different due to that. We decided to work at the product level, which obviously add a lot of complexity to the model, but we've made that to avoid several flaws, we believe, or shortcomings, especially for investors. The first one is illustrated by that slide. Obviously, railways as a low carbon solution compared to aviation or to road transportation. That's true in theory when you work at the sectoral level, but as an investor, you will look at securities issued by specific corporate with specific distribution of activities, and want to avoid value destruction or capture value creation due to that, or be sure that you have a real impact, which will depend at the end of the day on the real activity of the company. And one interesting illustration is the Japanese railway companies, which, unlike most of their peers in the world, are actually very diversified. And so that company, for instance, has only 22% of its sales in other businesses, which at the end of the day, construction, retail, and so on, which at the end of the day represent, according to our model, above 90% of its carbon footprint impact. Which is why you have to look at a granular level in terms of impact. Another illustration of why we capture what the company report and we don't apply only a model, because a model will be based on average, okay, sectoral average, so average price of a product within a sector. And in some sectors, when you have a wide distribution of price range for a given product, well, you may underestimate the impact of premium player, overestimate the impact of low-cost players, and that is illustrated here by Apple. When we model the production of Apple like we do for every company, we have a second layer of documentation, the bottom-up enrichment with reported data, because in the case of Apple, basically we would overestimate its output and therefore the energy consumed by its sold product, and therefore its scope 3 downstream by a factor 2 approximately. Rapidly, I said that basically you have to leverage on reported data, but you cannot just have a pipeline of data with reported data. As you know, unfortunately, we are not there when it comes to environmental data and the quality of their reporting. That's why we have a research team, by the way, and we are not only a data cruncher team, because for instance, for that company, well, they apply a rule of their own, I would say, to recalculate their scope 3 and their scope 1 and 2, excuse me, to net it based on avoided emission from low carbon investment. Why not? But if you don't have an expert having a closer look at what is being reported, you will compare companies which are actually not comparable. So the added value of the analyst today in every domain, financial analysis, environmental, and so on and so on and so on, is not anymore in the data collection. It is renormalization and making sure that you have a level playing field. The last consideration that I would add is more known, but well, I observe that there still exist out there many so-called low carbon indexes which does not factor scope 3 and therefore I think are not actually really low carbon indices. That's the weight of scope 3. You have it on the example of Renault. If you look at Renault on its scope 1 and 2 only, well, you underestimate by an extreme extent its carbon footprint and therefore its transition risk. All these considerations are well known at the EU level, discussed within the TEG, which is why for the low carbon benchmark, scope 3 is more than recommended, is mandatory in high-tech sectors. And this is why to come back to why we work at the product level, the green taxonomy, as you know, is very granular, very based on product. Manufacturer of materials are low carbon or not, are eligible or not, excuse me, through the technical criteria, which are not set at sectoral level, but depend, for instance, of the level of intensity to manufacture 1 ton of cement or 1 ton of steel. Before coming to the question of the temperature, I just want to share some consideration, and it's important, I think, because well, you will see other solution. I know that every year, and that's very helpful. Several solution providers show their solution. Maybe some of you feel that all that variety, and that's one of the things that we read on a recurring basis, is a sign that the sector is not mature, basically. I think it's false because there is a profusion of indicator which is parallel to the profusion of indicator on the financial data side. And so it boils down to the real question to be asked to a data provider, which is, what does your metric measure? And does it match with your need, which will not be the same one should you have a look from a risk analysis standpoint, value creation, compliance with the regulation, with the green share, and so on and so on. And so alignment in the universe, alignment in the sector, and all that will lead to different indicators which reflect different needs and questions. One important matter, however, is the question of the scope 3 that I mentioned, scope of the review within a sector. And so at the end of the day, I think that a key point, and I think that everyone will agree with that, is transparency on what is measured through the score and what is on what scope it is assumed because, as I shown for the Japanese railway companies, for instance, it may be misleading not to appraise a company on its whole businesses and on its whole scope. So our climate alignment solution is named SB2A. To apply what I just recommended, that indicator responds to the following question. Is my portfolio constituted of constituents which are aligned with their sectoral alignment target? Which means that in each sector, we will have companies which are aligned or not aligned, regardless of the intrinsic intensity of the sector. Because in each sector, you have SDA or SDA curve, SBT target. And so fit for their sector, each one of them should reach a certain level of intensity. And that's why what we appraise through that approach. So it's a 4-step approach. We calculate the intensity based on the product, following the method that I just outlined. We compare it to a reference scenario which reflects the sectoral decarbonation target. And here our philosophy is that we do not build our own assessment score. We always use third-party sourced from SBTi, EIA, IPCC, WRI for the food sector to appraise the performance and the element of a company. Because at the end of the day, we don't want that a company which is not compliant, which is not eligible for one of your climate funds, for instance, has to come to us to understand, our scoring grid and so on and so on. That company has to look at its SDA or SBTi target and comply with it, period. And I think that's a way more virtuous way to move the market towards the decarbonation. Afterwards, we built a forward-looking curve projection of the future intensity of the company, which will depend on its internal target. So it is a forward-looking approach. And then we calculate the carbon budget undershoot or overshoot reached by the company as a budget, and we calculate a temperature which will reflect the level of increase of temperature should all the economy reach the same budget, carbon budget overshoot or undershoot that the company have. I don't spend too much time on it. That's to reflect the fact that the intensity is appraised on a physical metric, just like the EU Green Taxonomy, by the way. And that is a more graphic and visual view of the following of the different steps that we are following. Historical data, the year of the review 2020, on which we have an extrapolation, which is an historical extrapolation, adjusted based on the target published by the company. We have a discount applied to that target to appraise its whether or not it is realistic. In other words, if the target is certified with robust certification, we will apply it to our assessment. And if not, if it's only an internal target, we will discount it. And then we have a budget which results from the difference between the red area and the green area, and that translates into a temperature. So here you have a broad overview of the result. And as you see, the distribution of the temperature is broad, including within a sector. That will depend on their mix, and again reflect the sectoral alignment with Paris target of each of these constituents. There is a comment, because we do not provide only data, we provide support, and each of our clients has access to the research team. On that, as I said, we have a third indicator, but we have no time to go through it, which is a transition risk and a physical risk indicator, which will depend on, here again, the intrinsic performance of the company, and vulnerability matrix, which are appraised at the sectoral level and which will depend on the sector and on the geography, resulting in a score, that score being itself afterwards translated into a financial metric. I recommend you all to consult the benchmark, which was very comprehensive and very scientific, written by the Institut Louis Bachelier in France and published in July 2021, which compare our method with compare many different methods, a dozen if I remember correctly, and underline its key differentiation factor compared to other ones. And with that, I finished even 2 minutes ahead of time. So that was basically the overview that I wanted to show you of our methodology. If you want to, well, to know more, please, I will be pleased to, to respond to questions during the Q&A session, or again, spend more time on a bilateral basis should you want to go more in depth into one of the steps that I briefly summarized in that presentation.
Thank you, Mathieu. Yeah, perfect on time. Let me remind you, just one thing, the event is recorded and the materials will be published on our website, so they will be fully available. I'm introducing now Leonard Schweser, economist at RUD based on science. My German pronunciation is not very good, so correct me if something wrong. So as Mathieu, 20 minutes time for your presentation. I will give you our regime chat. Wait, that's all. 3 minutes are missing more or less. So you keep track. I'll make you now a presenter so you can share your screen. There you go. Yes, okay.
Can you see it in presentation mode?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So then, yeah, I'm Leonard Schweser, working as economist for RUD based on science. We are a young company from Frankfurt. There will be some short words about us later, but I rather want to start right away. First of all, thanks to the organizers. Thanks, Ricardo, for giving us the time here to present our tools, our methodologies, and also thanks to the audience for taking the time simply and joining this morning. What struck me most when preparing this this presentation is basically how diverse the audience is. So in my perception, we have all the stakeholders, all the expertise on board that we need for accomplishing this transition to 1.5 degree world. That's pretty amazing. We have scientists, we have companies, we have investors, banks, insurers, public authorities, and it's also open to the wider public. So having everyone together that we need on this mission is a pretty good start, in my opinion, since all of you know this is a collective historic mission that we need to solve together. To quote David Attenborough, you most likely know him for his outstanding work, we are, after all, the greatest problem solvers that have ever existed on Earth. If working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. So it really is all about collaboration on this transition. And of course, mastering the transition heavily relies on identifying climate-related risks and opportunities, mitigating these risks and scaling up the opportunities. So against the backdrop of this conference, I was then wondering, how do we need to design tools and methodologies so that they can enable and eventually foster this decisive level of collaboration? Of course, there are all sorts of transition risks that you could look into and that need to be managed. But still, since this is the scope of our work, and as I would argue, it can be considered as the ultimate driver of climate-related transition risks, I will focus only on the alignment with the Paris Agreement. If you're not aligned with the Paris Agreement, that means that your business model depends on emissions that must no longer exist in a 1.5-degree world. This ultimately leads to business risks, to reputational risks, even litigation risks, or simply high carbon tax payments. So how do we need to design tools and methodologies so that they can enable and eventually foster this decisive collaboration? What we observe is that largest hurdles in this collaboration are often not technical, but rather operational. What we need is one uniform language to collaborate on this transition. Imagine the scientists having their models, investor having some ratings, companies have targets, governments do something completely else. Then we have entities such as real estate objects that cannot even be assessed. This is clearly not an efficient system for collaboratively mitigating risks. We need one uniform language, something that is applicable to a wide variety of use cases and can be used by all stakeholders with varying level of expertise. So in my eyes, this is the challenge. How can we master it? For me, it's often helpful to just become aware of the common ground of our mission, which is the Paris Agreement. So after all the efficiency improvements, new technologies, policies, whatever, this is about the level of expected global warming. The Paris Agreement aims at holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this will significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. So this is what we need to reach together, and each of us needs to contribute to this. Okay, and then I have a direct question to basically each of you. As investor, as company manager, whatever, do you feel like you are doing enough for this Paris Agreement? Do you know whether you are doing enough? And can you measure whether you are doing enough? And one more would be, what actually is your part? I admit that these questions might be a little tricky, but they are essentially important, right? And the good news is that our tools provide some answers to these questions, which is why we've been invited. To put it very simply, for economic entities, we can define a budget of emissions that takes into account the sector specifics. And all we need to do is to simply decouple our mainly economic activities from emissions fast enough so that we stay within that budget and then overall reach the global target. Being at net zero in 2050 is nice, but only if the pathway to get there is in line with the budget. I hope that this is not too disillusioning. So what you can see in this graphic is that the company following this red line is at net zero in 2050, but clearly not Paris aligned because the budget is too high, or the cumulative emissions until 2050 are too high. The other pathway shows also the reduction all the way to net zero in 2050, but in a way that it stays within the Paris budget for 1.5 degrees. And this is then basically what our XCC model does. We can break down this complexity into a very simple, very tangible number that expresses the alignment with the Paris Agreement. In the upper scenario, there was the company not being aligned with the Paris Agreement. In fact, it's 1.3 degrees above the benchmark. The other strategy, or the other company, is even below the benchmark. So the company is aligned with the Paris Agreement. It is doing enough following its strategy. It's 0.2 degrees below the benchmark. So stating the alignment of a company or any economic entity with the Paris Agreement is basically what we do. And then maybe a short overview about Right Based on Science. We are a provider of climate metrics and software, have been founded in Frankfurt in Germany 5 years ago. Behind all of these metrics is the X-degree compatibility model, which is kind of the engine in our work. It's built and developed by a team of currently 40 experts from all sorts of disciplines that are needed to properly capture the complexities of climate change. That means climate and data scientists, physicists, economists, mathematicians, and of course also experts in finance, law, business, communication, psychology, design, and many software developers. Together we are on the mission to increase transparency around climate-related risks and opportunities, and while doing so work together with customers and partners from the financial world, from the real estate segment, but also from all sorts of business areas, and work in pilot projects on different further areas. So then it might be time to get a little more specific, look into different use cases from the financial world, from the business world, and see how this degree Celsius number can unite all the different stakeholders. So starting with the real economy. On the left-hand side, you see Shop Apotheke, an online pharmacy. There we measure the current climate impact in degrees Celsius. We outline how it needs to be reduced for below 2 degrees, so for the Paris Agreement, and then evaluate which strategies can deliver this reduction. With Continental in the middle, which is a very big supplier for car producers in Germany and globally, we go one step further and distinguish between different business units, then evaluate their climate impact, also see whether internal investment options help Continental to successfully achieve and follow its outlined strategy, and look into their supply chain and screen whether my suppliers are aligned with the Paris Agreement or not, which obviously also affects my own transition risk in the longer term. On the right-hand side, you see Vonovia, a big housing company. We, of course, also look into the climate impact of the company itself, but here we slightly adjust our calculations to be able to assess real estate objects. May it be a single real estate object, a flat or a whole building, or a portfolio of different objects. Then we see how we can improve the climate impact of these buildings, and also analyze what are the required costs for doing so. Then this is, as I said, not only the business world, but we also are heavily engaged with the finance world. So on the left-hand side, MindFirst, fund manager. This is pretty much the default starting analysis, where we look into the climate impact of the portfolio. We can also include sovereign bonds, so it is not only about companies, but states can also be assessed. Additionally, we can use this degree Celsius number for product development, so setting up a green fund, and use the degree Celsius as a language to communicate with internal and external stakeholders of MindFirst, may it be clients or the invested companies. With the GLS Bank in the middle, a big German bank specializing on environmental topics, we look at their climate fund, but extend beyond that to the whole lending portfolio. We even pursue efforts to integrate the condition to be Paris aligned in the lending contract for the companies, so that a company needs to show it's on a way to become Paris aligned in order to get a loan from the GLS Bank. And there you really see the direct collaboration between the financial world and the real economy, which is enabled due to the methodology itself being recognized and usable for both sides. On the right-hand side, there's another use case with Barclays and Selective, a big bank and an index provider. There we simply develop a financial index consisting of only 2 degree aligned companies, which is also really interesting. So these were different use cases, different areas, different levels of depth. Of course, we have different products for that. So we normally start with this introductory report summarizing the key metrics and analyzing the status quo. Next level is the software. There we have different products for investors, for company managers, but also for real estate managers. where you can play around a little with the assumptions, see how things change if you take that one company or sovereign bond from your portfolio, or for a company, what if you follow another strategy, and see how sensitive the results are. Even one step further is then the public API, where you can use our metrics in your own product development and integrate them smoothly into your system. So these were different use cases, different products, but all united by this degree Celsius number, all united by this XCC model. So it's time to look into that XCC model, what we actually do, how it works. First of all, what is the XCC model? The XCC model is an economic climate impact model which analyzes the degree of global warming by 2050 that an economic entity is compatible with under various scenarios. And let me here stress the economic entity again. So we can look into companies, we can assess sovereign bonds, we can look into real estate objects, we can have portfolios combining all of this, we can look into a single investment in a certain project, and in different pilot projects we look, for example, also into different products. So what is the climate impact of that single product, and also look into individual consumption behavior, and then have an XCC for a person, to basically see how my personal actions contribute or do not contribute to the Paris Agreement. So how does it work? There are basically 4 steps, 4 questions that build up on each other to get this degree Celsius numbers. We start with question number 1 and then go step by step. First question is, how many emissions are generated every year until 2050 to create 1 million euro in gross value added? The result is an economic emission intensity in CO2 per million euros of gross value added. So how intense your output basically is. Question 2 takes this EEI, this economic emission intensity, and measures how many emissions would be generated if the whole world operated at this emission intensity until 2050. The result are global emissions in tons of CO2. And then we take these global emissions, put them into a climate model, and ask the question, what degree of global warming could we expect if this amount of emissions reaches the atmosphere? So from that, we get the baseline XCC, because we've looked into a baseline scenario, first of all. And then this basically answers the question, okay, if every company operated with this emission intensity until 2050, the world would warm by X degrees. What is important here is that we use a climate model for that in the third step, so not a simple score or conversion factor. This enables us to look into different gases, to quantify uncertainty in the climate system. So as you know, there are a lot of parameters with deep uncertainty around them. So here we can analyze these aspects, see how things would change if, for example, the equilibrium climate sensitivity does not follow mean expectations, but just simply consider the probability distribution and then see how sensitive the results are for that. But there's one more step. After the baseline XCC, we need to take into account sector-specific benchmarks. So as you all know, the IEA, for example, or other institutions provide these scenarios with sectoral decarbonization roadmaps. We take these scenarios and translate them into benchmarks. This is then called a target XCC. And it's as simple as that if your baseline XCC or this XCC following another scenario is below the benchmark, causes less warming, then you are aligned with the Paris Agreement. If you're above, then you're not aligned. So what goes in, what comes out? The different input parameters are shown on the left-hand side on the top. Actually quite simple. We get the GVA, which is for company, EBITDA plus personal costs. And on the other hand side, the CO2 emissions, of course, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, so the direct and indirect emissions. As you all know, is estimating scope 3 emissions is a very, very tricky aspect. So there we are very happy to have a partner in Agentum that takes this as seriously as we do. And when we look into other entities, so not only companies, we of course need to adjust these input data slightly. On the other hand side, we have mitigation scenarios and other socioeconomic scenarios like the SSPs, and then the 1.5, 1.75, and 2 degree scenarios of, for example, the IEA or the NGFS, or quantified with the One Earth Climate Model, the OECM model. We also take into account macroeconomic and macroeconomic data from the World Bank, for example, to adjust for inflation biases and differences in purchasing power parity across the world. And then there's this climate model, the FAIR model, which has been developed and is still maintained by the University of Oxford and Melbourne. Then all of this gets combined in the XCC compatibility model. The output is the baseline XCC as already outlined, target XCCs, and the simple difference, the gap, gives you an indication about alignment or misalignment. So almost to the end, I want to kind of give an invitation, especially to academia, but also the other actors from the real and financial economy. What we observed over the last years is that there are many methodologies looking into these topics, and most of them are essentially black box methodologies, which makes it really, really hard to critically examine them, to further develop them with external experts. So what we are doing is to have that project right open since May 2019, so a little more than 2 years now, where we offer free access to the model for academia. We've worked with a lot of universities and their students, professors, and also partners from the real and financial economy, such as, for example, again, Agentum, helping us here with the data needs. The next step is to go open source with the model by the end of this year, so relatively soon, in order to foster further collaboration, to adapt to new use cases, and just simply constantly improve the analysis based on solid science. So then, to conclude, climate change is complex, and we should speak about it in one language. Then we can focus on the common goal and accomplish this transition together in degrees Celsius. Then, thank you very much for listening, and I would hand back to Ricardo.
Thank you, Leonard. Let me remind you, for any questions, you may write them in the question section. I will read them to our guests during the Q&A session. So now let me introduce you Ian Stannard, Senior Engagement Manager at Agentum, will be closing this first session. So I'll make you a presenter. You should now be able to share your screen. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Right, okay. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the opportunity to present at today's event. Just to start off, a few words about Agentum, just for those who may not be familiar with Agentum. So Agentum is a climate transition specialist, has been collecting emissions data for many years now, building a very extensive database going back 10 years of a very detailed and granular level emissions data across scope 1, 2, and 3, and importantly across all 15 categories of scope 3 emissions. And this allows for some very, very detailed analysis. On the back of that, the Agentum has been able to build many different analytical tools to help with the analysis of that data, and then to implement that and put that into practice, allowing our customers from right across the financial sector and major corporates to be able to manage their measure and manage their climate transition risks. So this could be anything from carrying out very detailed TCFD aligned footprinting to alignment analysis to portfolio optimization and screening, developing and new active climate related strategies such as avoiding emission strategies or carbon reduction strategies, right through to index creation, and as well as them doing some very specialist projects. So our customers range from people such as the ECB and other central banks looking at stress testing. So we helped the ECB put in place the stress testing methodology and provided them the data to do that. So that is obviously very, very important now for all the banks, particularly within Europe. So we work with the commercial banks, the investment banks, right through to the major pension funds and asset managers and hedge funds, right through to other people such as wealth managers, index providers, and as we just heard with other partners such as Right.Based as well. So what I'd like to do today is actually take a look at a very specific case that we've carried out recently, actually, with another one of our customers. So this is a project we undertook with the World Gold Council, and we were looking at how to incorporate gold into a global multi-asset portfolio from a climate perspective, and to analyze the impact that gold would have on that portfolio, both from a climate perspective, but also from a financial perspective as well. So we were also looking at ways in which we could optimize gold's inclusion to meet both our climate goals as well as maintaining our financial goals with regards to performance and other financial risk profiles. So as integrating climate risk and financial risk into that study. So just a little introduction of some of the things we had to sort of think about when we were first undertaking this project. Now, obviously, when you're starting to integrate alternative assets into your portfolio, there's a number of challenges that come up, and it is something we're actually seeing increasingly from our customers. We cover quite extensively, as you'd imagine, the listed equity universe as well as the unlisted companies and private companies globally, corporate bonds, as well as sovereign bonds, and also then increasingly looking at things like real estate and infrastructure projects. And when we start to get into these more alternative assets, obviously the data then becomes far more challenging. So we have to do a lot more research into those right down to individual asset level and look at those assets on a case-by-case basis. And this was the case for gold. So gold is not normally looked at in this way, particularly when we look at it from an investment perspective. So the standard sources for data and also methodologies were actually not available to us. So we had to do a lot of work here to develop that. We had to look at the ways in which we can generate the data to be able to carry out this analysis. There's also developing the methodologies as well to not only footprint gold as an investment asset, but also how to integrate it into a global multi-asset portfolio. So there were some of the two big challenges that our research team had to undertake for this project. So luckily we was working with the World Gold Council, so they had a huge, as you imagine, have a huge amount of information available from their extensive research, which we was able to draw on. So we actually had to work very, very closely with that. So previously, though, a lot of the work had been focusing on gold as a commodity, as a mined commodity. So we had to then look at this from an investor's perspective, which obviously is very, very different. So that's something we had to be very, very mindful of. So a lot of the data, which is normally driven by the data from the mining companies, the emissions from the mining companies, we had to look at that very carefully and then adapt it to make it acceptable for footprinting gold from an investor's perspective. There are also some other things we had to take into account as well. One of those was where the gold was actually coming from. So that purchased gold actually comes from many different sources. So it could be newly mined gold, it could be existing gold, it could be recycled gold. So we had to take all of those into account as well. And even when we're just looking at newly mined gold, we had to look at the regional differences, because the carbon footprint for gold from different regions is very, very different, as we will see in just a minute as well. So these are all the things we had to take into consideration. So we had to sort of make some assumptions, some working assumptions here about how we were going to then analyze gold and integrate gold, particularly around those things we just mentioned. So when we're looking at analyzing gold from an investor perspective, we're basically assuming that the investor, once they buy gold, they are inheriting a proportion of the emissions generated through the mining of that gold and the processing of that gold. So as an investor buying gold, you are actually inheriting and those emissions. So we had to build that into the analysis. And we talked a little bit about that variation in emissions depending on where the gold was mined. Our analysis found that actually one of the biggest drivers of those variations was the energy use. So that's something we had to take into account and carry out that analysis on a regional level, looking at the energy uses there. Again, we was able to draw on a lot of research which was done by the World Gold Council with regards to regional energy use. So depending if the mines were drawing from the grid or whether mines were actually using their own locally generated energy, that also impacted whether that was included in scope 1 or 2 of their emissions as well. And also that mix of gold as well. So we were looking at newly mined and recycled gold, and we basically were able then to take account of the mix of gold, again based on the research by the World Gold Council. The emissions from newly mined and recycled gold, as you can imagine, are very, very different. So that had to be taken into account. So once we've taken all those things into account, we can actually then start to see how the footprint of gold starts to develop. So just looking at those regional variations we talked about. So here we have scope 1 and 2 emissions for gold mined in the various different regions, and you can see that gold mined in South Africa has an actually much bigger footprint than the gold mined in many other regions. So this is obviously something we have to take into account. So just looking at those, how we started to pull all this information together. So for newly mined and recycled, we used the 70-30 mix, and this was in line with the research developed by the World Gold Council, and that allowed us then to be able to apply the emissions from those two different types of gold into our overall global footprint for investment gold. Now, we also did the analysis using 100% newly mined gold as well, but this was so we could actually take a worst case scenario as well. Then, as we talked about translating the emissions data into investment gold, once we start to break it down, the emissions coming from the mining, we talked about how the investor will inherit those emissions, and the scope 1 and 2 emissions from the mining of gold actually translates into the upstream scope 3 emissions for investment gold, while the downstream scope 3 emissions from gold mining actually then becomes the scope 1 and 2 emissions for the investor. So we had to go through that process of translating those emissions from the mining of gold into the footprint for the gold as an investment. And as we had to take into account those regional adjustments as well.
Ian, excuse me if I'm interrupting. The slides are fixed. I don't know if it's a problem of the software, or do you see your slides going on? Or
yes, my slides are working. Yours not?
No. Okay. Maybe we can try by sharing. Maybe I can try to share the slides, and you may tell me when to go on. Let's see if it works. Would that be okay with you?
Yep, sure.
Okay, let's see. I beg your pardon for interrupting.
No problem. I didn't realize the slides were not moving on.
I need to. So, do you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay. Do you see it moving?
Yeah, that's moving. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, you want to tell me where exactly you?
Right. Okay. Well, we can stop here and say this chart here. So this was the regional. We talked about the regional variations in emissions, particularly generated from energy for the different areas of gold mining. And as we mentioned, so you can see here, South Africa is the region where we have the biggest footprint, or largest footprint for gold mining, and that's those are represented in scope 1 and 2 here, as you can see. So if we go on to the next slide. So this is we just spoke about how we then started to integrate these things into the overall footprint for gold. Obviously, that's 70-30 split between newly mined and recycled gold. But there's a worst case scenario where we also looked at 100% newly mined gold, and then the translating the emissions from gold mining into investment gold, as we mentioned, the scope 1 and 2 from the gold mining, and then go into the upstream scope 3 emissions for investment gold, while downstream scope 3 emissions from gold mining translate into scope 1 and 2 emissions for the investor. And as we can, as we've seen, we can then factor in those regional differences into an overall global footprint emissions, carbon emissions footprint for gold from an investor's perspective. And that's the important factor, that this has been that we're translating that from gold mining, or the mining of gold, into investment gold. Kathy, we can move on to the next slide. So once we put all of that together, we can see here, this is our regional carbon footprint for scope 1 and 2 and 3 for investment gold. So again, we can see those regional differences in place, and having it, and once again, having that across all 3 scopes is extremely important as well, to incorporate all of those emissions, not just from the those emissions that you're inheriting from the gold mining, but also in capturing all the value and supply chain emissions as well into your global footprint. And so taking those regional variations, we're then able to work out a global emissions footprint for gold as an investment using the World Gold Council's research on the production of gold. So taking the proportions of gold produced in those different regions, we're obviously able to provide a single overall investment gold footprint. So we move on to the next slide. So now we have the footprint. We need to, for gold, we now need to integrate this into our portfolio. And this obviously needs to be done on a consistent approach so we can actually then analyze gold on the consistent basis. Now, within our multi-asset portfolio, we had equities and corporate bonds, and we constructed that multi-asset portfolio based on the sort of industry standards for screening of assets across the different regions, and basing it on taking into account such as things as the overall size of investment markets in different regions and liquidity conditions and so on. So we screen for all of those factors to build the overall portfolio across equities and corporate bonds, and into which we could then integrate gold as an investment. Now, we looked at various different ways under which to do that. The option we chose in this particular case was to use the weighted average intensity by market capitalization. That gave us the most consistent approach with the other assets included in the portfolio. So that would then allow us to carry out the not just the climate related analysis, but also the financial market analysis. So we could carry out the climate analysis, not just the footprinting, but the forward-looking analysis, the alignment analysis, temperature analysis, and so on. So all of the detailed methodology on how we constructed the portfolio and integrated gold into the portfolio is available in the research paper, which is on the World Gold Council website. So that's now given us that consistent approach to carry out that analysis to move forward. So we move on to the next slide on that, and then here we can see how we start to look at some of the results. We can see how gold impacts the portfolio. Now, we're carrying out this analysis using our investment, our climate and financial tools, which are available on the Agentum platform, so the Element 6 platform, which brings together all our analytical tools as well as all of our data. So you can draw on data covering 30,000 securities across equities, corporate bonds, sovereign bonds from around the world to construct portfolios. And into that we then integrated gold as an asset. And then we can carry out our analysis. We can carry out on the platform, we was able to carry out the back testing, the portfolio optimization, so we can see the most optimal levels at which to incorporate gold under certain financial constraints. So we can impose constraints on the financial performance, as well as the in terms of returns, but also in terms of risk parameters. So the normal portfolio risk parameters you would look at, including things such as value at risk and volatility. So the Element 6 platform and our backtesting tools allows you to then carry out both climate and financial market analysis. So you can integrate assets into your portfolio or optimize your portfolio to both your climate and to your financial risk parameters. And here, carrying out that analysis, we can start to see the impact that that gold has on the portfolio. So here we have the weighted average intensity. So this is the by market cap, as we mentioned. So this is the footprint of the portfolio, and you can see as we increase the weighting of gold within the portfolio, the intensity of the portfolio starts to come down. So the carbon footprint of the portfolio starts to reduce. So this is again taking into account scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So we can start to see that there is a beneficial impact on the footprint of the portfolio with the introduction of gold as an investment asset. So if we can move on to the next slide. So here we have some of the financial data as well. So this is just the straightforward returns. And here we can see the returns of the portfolio, again using our back testing and optimization tools from the Element 6 platform. You can see that we have, again, some evidence of a positive impact from including gold into the portfolio over this period. Now, it must be pointed out that actually in this snapshot here, we're only going back 5 years, and actually it turns out over that 5 years, it was a particularly good period for gold, and actually gold performed particularly well, especially given it was during a period where we had obviously a lot of disruption to financial markets, including the global pandemic, and gold as a quite often seen as a safe haven performed actually quite relatively well during that period. So as you would have expected, you are seeing some positive impact from including gold into the portfolio during that period. We actually did the back testing over a longer period. We actually went back over 20 years, and again, we were still finding evidence of a positive impact, both from a climate perspective and from a financial perspective as well. So we were finding, even over that longer testing period, we were finding evidence that the introduction of gold to a global multi-asset portfolio was having a positive impact. So yeah, so if we move on to the next slide. So again, here we can start to see not just what the current footprint of the portfolio is, but we can also see the impact of gold in the portfolio from a forward-looking alignment perspective as well. So this is looking at how the portfolio aligns to various different climate scenarios. So the Agentum Element 6 platform allows you to carry out this analysis at an individual company level or sector level or portfolio level. So here we have the portfolio examples. Now we can carry out this analysis against all the various different climate scenarios, from the IPCC to the NGFS, and here we've actually showing the impact of gold on the portfolio and various different weights of gold within the portfolio against the net zero scenario. So quite often you would look at how portfolio looks against various different scenarios. Here we've actually just chosen one scenario, so the net zero scenario, and we're looking at how different portfolios with different weightings of gold within those portfolios would actually align to that net zero. And as you can see, again, we're finding evidence that introducing gold to the portfolio has a positive impact on aligning our global multi-asset portfolio to that net zero scenario. So the lower line you see is that global net zero scenario, so looking for net zero by 2050. So again, we can actually do it. We can actually choose different scenarios, different time frames as well. So we have lots of flexibility about the analysis we can carry out on your portfolios, or give you the tools to carry out that analysis on your portfolios. And so there's huge amounts of flexibility here. But under this particular scenario, we can see that even with a high weighting of gold, our multi-asset portfolio is still struggling to align to that net zero scenario. But the higher the weighting, it does show there's evidence that the portfolio does become closer aligned to that portfolio. So it's quite from a gold investor perspective, that is quite encouraging news, that it's actually helping to align your portfolio to that net zero scenario. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Yep. So another piece of analysis we can carry out is to look at how your portfolios, how resilient they are to climate transition risks and shocks. We can do that in various different ways. One of the methods we've used here is to use a carbon pricing or a cost of carbon, and to see how that impacts a portfolio going forward. So as carbon pricing is introduced, and we can introduce that carbon pricing using various different assumptions and scenarios, and we can see what the impact is going forward. So under that carbon pricing analysis and cost of carbon analysis, again, we can see the impact that gold has on the resilience of the portfolio, and we can see that the potential losses of the portfolio from an introduction of carbon pricing is actually reduced as the weighting of gold is increased within the portfolio as well. So it does show that there is again some positive impacts. We also showed there was some positive impact from including gold into the portfolio. Okay, so we move on to the next slide. So I think this case study here, which we carried out with the World Gold Council, I think is sort of highlights some of the work that we can do with our various different customers. So whereas we're providing our data and analytics to customers to carry out their day-to-day analysis of their portfolios, to do their footprinting, do their TCFD reporting, do their stress testing of their investment portfolios or their loan books if they're a bank. On top of that, we're actually also able to bring our data and analysis and analytical skills to carry out these more bespoke projects, and that's an increasing trend that we're seeing. So particularly with regards to alternative assets, we're increasingly being asked now to if we can include more assets into our portfolio analysis, and hopefully this shows some of the processes that we can go through to develop the methodology and approaches to be able to include these new assets into portfolios, and to be able to do that again on a sort of consistent approach, so you can make those direct comparisons, and it can be integrated into your portfolio to then be able to carry out both that climate and financial analysis of your portfolio. Something which has obviously been mentioned before in previous presentations, but again is something which is very, very important for Agentum, and that is transparency. And this runs right through everything we do, from our data collection to the way in which we then ensure the quality of our data. So we actually provide detailed notes and methodology against every single data point that we provide, to provide that transparency, and then that we translate through into the methodology around the tools and the analysis that we provide. So that's something that's very, very important to us. I think it's crucial that people understand exactly where the data is coming from, and the quality of the data, as well as the methodology behind the analysis. So that really allows an investor to understand the full climate risk impact on their portfolios. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into some of the tools and methodologies that we use at Agentum. Obviously, this is just one specific use case we've shown here today, but I think it's quite a good example of how we work with various different customers to help them meet the challenges with regards to being able to understand the climate risks in their portfolios or investments. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Let me thank also again Mathieu and Lennart for their presentation. This concludes this first session of the conference, and clearly, again, if you have any questions, you may write them in the question section. After the virtual roundtable, we will open a little debate with the audience. Now I would leave the floor to the virtual roundtable for a little discussion on what's being presented right now. I would call Anne-Claire Abadi, portfolio manager and SRI and environmental specialist at Sycamore Asset Management. Good morning, Anne-Claire.
Hello, good morning.
So please, you may begin.
Yeah, sure. I will maybe do a very short first thought about the presentation, which were from high quality this morning. I think it shows us that first thing is that we all agree on the importance and the emergency of integrating climate risks and integrating climate understanding within the financial strategies that we are pursuing, and that beyond our role as asset manager or as investors to generate financial performance, that we also have to get a good understanding and also a good contribution to the climate transition. So that's one first thing. The second thing is that I was impressed by the quality of the presentation, and I'm a little bit afraid that it might look too sophisticated for most investors, which are quite new to the area of understanding climate-related risks and opportunities. But the fact is that the environmental science and the environmental mechanisms are not that easy. So when you want to implement a meaningful strategy for the environment through your portfolio, you need to get into this kind of sophistication. So that's maybe a very broad introduction on the three presentations we have seen this morning, but I'm sure we will discuss them further with my colleagues.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you. I would introduce now second guest from our panel, Manuela Mazzoleni, direttrice di sostenibilità tasso gestioni. If you want to share with us some of your thoughts with respect to what's been presented.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, well, thank you again as it's not the first time I'm involved in this annual event organized by FEM, and I have to say it's always very, very interesting for me. I normally follow this whole area of sustainability from the point of view of the regulation and the evolution of the regulation, and so kind of I'm always stressing and the issues that the asset managers have in actually finding data and the support in terms of analysis to their investment choices, which are instrumental to from my point of view, to complying with the increase in regulation. So seeing all this work that and how it's evolving, over the years is really getting more and more sophisticated and thorough. The whole data collection and analysis and development of methodologies is it's extremely interesting, and in a way it sort of also gives hope to me that kind of there are good chances of managing to put on the ground all this regulation and regulatory requirements, and actually find foundation of all this into what's happening out there in companies, and that the tools are being developed to actually be able to implement these net zero strategies. So that's just as a general comment. Then and in the second round I will share with you just a few data where the market is going on aggregate level, which is could just put a bit in the put a framework to what we've heard up to now.
I completely agree. Disclosure and reporting is really, really important at this stage. So let me then introduce you the third guest of ours, Riccardo Tedesco, advisory ESG product specialist at Nordea Investment Funds. Please, Riccardo.
Hi.
That's your thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you for some seconds. Okay. Well, I think that the three presentations were absolutely interesting from my point of view, and I wrote down many notes because I think that we touched several interesting points. And let's say from the perspective of Nordea, we have been implementing TCFD recommendations, so we have a clear climate strategy, let's say, and climate approach, which is basically based on the TCFD recommendation. So we have a governance strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So it's not new, this the importance and the relevance of implementing the climate risk in the investment framework. That said, I think to me, the main interesting points were the challenges that come across this topic, like the estimation of scope 3 emission. And then also I was particularly interested into the biodiversity data points that were mentioned during those presentations, because I think that biodiversity right now could be the next big challenge for in the asset manager industry. And also is basic. I think it's not the topic of this call, but also I think was in the Iceberg Data Lab presentation. They mentioned the pi data points, and I was quite let's say interested, because the majority of our effort now is to go along with the regulation that we mentioned, because we are implementing a pi engine, and it's taking a lot of effort from our side to develop this model. So, but again, I think that we touched many interesting points in those presentations.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, scope 3 data is certainly of paramount importance, and also connection with the widening scope in reporting, which will be which is it comes from the CSRD reporting directive. It will widen not only the scope in companies that will be reporting, but also the quality of information. And I think this is really important and gives you the degree of commitment that at least European Commission took in disclosing data, this kind of data, and so helping companies to give stakeholders a bigger set of information on what their environmental performance and commitment is, and obviously financial markets to better price their portfolios. And on biodiversity side, let me mention also the TCFD initiative, which is just being launched, and which would require companies also to disclose information on their impact on biodiversity, not only on climate change, so as a whole natural ecosystem. So as well, this is an important point I wanted to stress. I would go back to Anne if she has any other comments to add.
Sure. Maybe I can start with a point on data, because and then we can talk about the biodiversity too. The first thing regarding data is when I started as an ESG analyst and as a portfolio manager, we had a huge issue getting some data, and now we are crowding below a quantity of data, which may be or not of any help when you are an investor or when you are a responsible investor to take decision and to report on your impact for the finance for your clients. So I would warn a little bit regarding data, because I think the issue regarding data is not about the quantity or the availability, is really about the quality of data and which kind of data are you looking for. Because basically you can compute big data in big tables, but if you don't know what you are looking for with this data, it's really meaningless. So
Anne, I think we've lost you. Can you hear me? Do any of you hear Anne, or it's freezed? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll try to fix this. In the meanwhile, Manuela, you were mentioning you wanted to show a couple of data, I guess. So let me allow you to present to share your screen. You know, I'll try
Yes,
to
sure.
go back
I mean,
to.
Thank you. I didn't really want to sort of to go through the whole presentation, but just to share a few data which regards the market and the size of the market. So that this is basically what's driving this whole demand for data, because as you know, I mean, obviously there were sustainable investors and investors that were looking at
I divest from train and I invest in sports car, and then I have reduced the carbon footprint of my portfolio.
I'm sorry, I think we've lost you for a couple of minutes.
Sorry.
So moving on.
Am I back?
No, that's okay.
Yes,
If you can go on, I can wait.
I don't know where I've been cut, but I was just putting a very quick demonstration on the carbon footprint and how it can be misleading. I don't know if you heard about that. Okay, so just saying that you first need to define your strategy and find the tools that are helping you to answer your own question. Do you want a portfolio which contributes? Do you want a portfolio which avoids risk, etc.? And then you will pick up the right tools and the right indicators. And I was mentioning something which was also mentioned by Iceberg Data Lab in the introduction, which is basically if you only look at carbon footprint as it is reported and used in finance right now, basically you will have scope 1 plus scope 2 plus part of scope 3, and you will have Ferrari, which has a carbon footprint which is 1/3 of the carbon footprint of Alstom. And then from a portfolio manager standpoint, you can divest from train and railways, and you can invest all in sports cars, and you will have decreased the carbon footprint of your portfolio by 99%. And obviously, when you want to contribute to the environmental transition, it's exactly the contrary that we should support. So first define your thesis, then look for the tools that are meaningful for you, and appropriate yourself the data to really understand what they mean and how you can use them to serve your investment thesis and your environmental thesis. And I will stop there on the data, and maybe we come back later on biodiversity.
Yes, of course. Manuela, please, you may.
Thank you.
You may continue. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem at all. So okay, but just to kind of just share a couple of data, just to give a dimension of the market we're talking about at European level for or at least the demand for all these data, which as I was saying earlier, obviously has been driven, existed before this whole regulatory tsunami of SFDR and taxonomy, but obviously has had a big push. And so now we can see that at in Italy now already. Can you see actually the presentation? Or
yes.
Yeah. Okay. You can see that at national level, we have already 25% of the asset under management, which is roughly 300 billion, are actually investing in Article 8 and Article 9 products. We know that that is not a labeling; it's just a transparency obligation, but just gives a dimension of the market we're looking at. And how really the industry of asset management is moving towards incorporating sustainability asset analysis in their normal day-to-day investment analysis. So we're already still, although we're in a phase of transition still, it's already a third, almost a third of the market. And the same can be said at European level, where we have 3.7 trillion of asset under management invested. This is only Q1, so it's really as just the regulation at Q1 of 2021. So just had the SFDR regulation come into force, so we already had 3.7 trillion of asset under management invested in Article 8 product and 340 billions in Article 9 products. So again, here is represented roughly between a fourth and a third of the European market. Well, if we put a focus on climate focused funds, these are moving into Morningstar data. Well, previous one was, so they're not totally aligned because obviously the methodologies for collecting this data is slightly different. But if we look at climate focused fund, we have 186 billion asset under management in Europe. These which we just put funds invested in products that have some sort of climate focus, and as it shows here, that you can also identified different types of products that have some kind of climate focus that goes from products which are climate, we are sort of can be defined as low carbon, so which are funds that aim at investing in assets that overall yields their overall portfolio carbon footprint, which is lower than the average of that sector. Then we have the climate conscious funds that can be considered those that invest into companies that have some sort of climate strategy, and so they in their business plan that they integrate in their business plan the climate strategy. Then you have the climate solution funds that invest in funds that and in companies that are contributed to transitions, to developing transition technologies and products which are climate, that incorporate some climate awareness. Then we have clean energy that invest into funds, into activities that actually carry out activities that contribute to transition towards clean energy. And then we have green bond funds that are funds that invest in companies which are not necessarily green, but they are issuing green funds to promote their transition towards sustainability. So we can see that also, you know, we have quite a broad diversification of strategies to you know, that all pursue some climate focused objective. But obviously all these we need will need the data we were talking about earlier. As the colleague was saying, now the problem, there are various problems because the regulation requires the transparency from basically from the 1st of January 2021. Asset managers will need to be transparent about the carbon footprint, basically, or the taxonomy alignment, to be more correct, the taxonomy alignment of the investment funds. And so this is really large demand from asset managers to companies and to data providers. But although we come to what we call the data puzzle, which is the fact that the taxonomy regulation requires this sort of disclosure from the 1st of January from asset managers, but from the undertakings, which is from issuers, the same degrees of transparency will be required from the end of 2022 if we talk about non-financial market participants, which is the regulatory way to call issuers, or financial market participants have time even for till 2023. So and also the information, the quality of information, the type of information required is different, and at the same time we have some other regulation which will come into force over the next couple of years, which are the non-financial non-financial reporting directive, which will come into place in its new into fruition in its new revised, more demanding format in probably not before 2024. And then we have this ASAP, which is the new regulatory tool to support concentration and easier access to information. The ASAP is a European single access point for data. So there is a lot of work in terms of the regulation. It's sort of on one side, demanding intermediaries to make data available, but obviously this is putting a lot of pressure on asset managers to find this data, and that's why I was saying earlier that obviously all this work that has been done by the various market providers is extremely useful, but we have issues probably still with coverage, granularity, maybe not so much of quantity anymore, because as my colleague earlier was saying, now the data are coming out, but there is still an issue of standardization, comparability. It was very good to hear all the stress and transparency of methodology, which is crucial in kind of enhancing quality and also competition amongst providers in a way to just to sort of to enhance the overall data quality and availability. The Commission is still, and in producing the regulation, is still a bit unclear on what way and what kind of approach to data is supporting. Because on one side is encouraging access to data straight from companies, and in some piece of the regulation, in other regulation is making more an opening towards a third data providers, and so there is still a bit of confusion in because the market is the market of data and of analysis is really in transition, but on the other side is really developing very quickly. So that's the positive side, I would say.
Yes, I agree. I mean, all these new regulations clearly put pressure on the financial side, even on the production side, as companies need to produce this data.
Exactly.
Small and medium enterprises. But I would say it even puts pressure on the institutions themselves, as they need to run coherent all these initiatives all together and answering that standardization request that comes from the market. So yeah, it's clearly positive, but it really raises the bar for the information availability challenge. Riccardo, do you have any comments to add?
You made very good points. I mean, the regulation is, as I said before, the biggest employer for us right now, because in terms of workload. On the other end, also, yeah, the amount of data is I would say crazy, and it's very challenging to understand the quality of them, as Claire mentioned during her speech. So basically, we are constantly assessing the new models, new framework in order to cover, let's say, the gap that sometimes we find. For instance, as far as I remember, we are using a scenario-based analysis that has been developed in 2018 when we joined the Environment Program Finance Initiative of the United Nations. And so basically, we identify multiple scenarios. Most common ones are 1.5 degrees, 2, 3, and 4. And then, of course, we in this model, we try to assess both the physical hazards, like acute events or chronic climate change, and the transition hazards, which are related mainly to changes in policies or technological innovation. And we picked this model because the outcome is a climate value at risk, and I'm sure that you're already familiar with this value, and basically it's the potential loss of portfolio in over 15 years. And normally we have three kind of climate value at risk: a physical one, a policy climate value at risk, and the technology climate value at risk. And the challenge is to aggregate them, because not all of them are covering all the scenarios. So that's why understand the quality of data and assess every time new models and new approaches for us is absolutely crucial in order to implement and to improve our approach. That said, I would like to stress also the idea that you already mentioned about transparency, because normally during our assessment we picked 2 or 3 models, and then we check the data accuracy, the coverage of the data points. But transparency is very, I would say, the main requirement that that is basically fundamental to understand the quality of the model or the data provided. And we apply the framework. I call it, that's a very Italian style, PCAF, because is the code for partnership for carbon accounting financial, if I remember correctly. And we can apply, it's very useful because we can apply a score to each model in order to understand the quality of the data inside of those models. And basically the score goes from 1 to 5 and is based on 3 indicators, which are the reported emission, the physical activity-based emission, and economic activity-based emission. And that's very useful for us in order to get a clear score of the model and to say, okay, we want to implement it or not in our framework in order to get a tangible, let's say, idea about the climate risk.
Yeah, that's, I guess, a good approach to keep in mind different approaches and models. And I believe you wanted to add something on biodiversity side.
Yes, sure. Maybe I will do a little bit of storytelling here, but back in 2015, when we started to formalize, well, when we first formalized our environmental strategy, everybody was talking about climate, but we put an emphasis on the fact that the environment is not only climate, because the environment is an ecosystem, and as the word says, it's a system. So it means that there is interrelation and an impact from climate on biodiversity, on resources and waste, on water cycles, on water pollutions, etc. And so that if we wanted to pursue a convincing environmental strategy, we needed to thought about all these challenges at the same time. And just to illustrate a little bit, if I look at activities, from the pure carbon standpoint, plastic is really a good solution for packaging, for instance. If I introduce waste, biodiversity, and water in the equation, it's not anymore a good solution. So when I want to select, I need also to think about the other environmental externalities that may be generating by the fact of trying to solve the climate equation on the short term. Same thing with nuclear, same thing with diesel. Diesel is good from the carbon standpoint compared to other combustion engine. It's not good from an air quality standpoint. So at the beginning of our strategy on the environment, we really emphasizes the fact that we need to consider not only the climate, but also biodiversity, resources and waste, water and air quality, and not thinking about them in silo. And then maybe second thing, which is also one of the guiding principle for us as Sycomore management, is that as we were looking through our environmental fund to actively contribute to the environmental transition, we also need to think about the full life cycle of any product and services. And this is where, when we look at carbon footprint, we sometimes have some big blind spots. And that's why we decided to go for a metric that it's a lot more comprehensive, and that encompasses all the 5 challenges I just quoted, but also the full life cycle assessment to understand which was our question, or the question we wanted to solve, which was a very simple one, which is which are the products, which are the services, which are the activities or the companies, and at the very end, which are the portfolios that will actively contribute to the environmental transition. And so we decided to build the metric, which is called NEC. NEC means net environmental contribution. And we will look at the positive and negative physical impacts on the environment, so on the 5 environmental challenges over the full life cycle assessment. And based on that, we will have a metric which ranges from -100% to +100%. The 0 percentage point being the average environmental impact for fulfilling a service or for fulfilling a function, such as moving people, such as feeding people, such as providing 1 megawatt-hour of electricity, and so on and so forth. And based on that, we are able to assess companies to decide and invest, and also to report for our final investors on which kind of contribution my portfolio is actually generating. And maybe just on that, the one things and where we are now with this metric is that we have put it into an initiative because, as we said, transparency, and as my colleague said earlier on the call, transparency is very key. The methodology are complex enough, but the environmental state of the art is not yet established. So it's a lot of moving parts, and we need cooperation, and we need partners in order to always improve our understanding, improve our metrics, and also then being able to implement them into investment strategy that are meaningful for the people who will choose to invest on them. So that's maybe one of the things. And linking back to biodiversity, which was the very first point, is that we are now also Sycomore Asset Management has also partnered with 3 other asset managers in order to develop a biodiversity indicator. So we are now working with Iceberg Data Lab on that. And the idea of strengthening our understanding of biodiversity is also to be able to integrate a more granular biodiversity assessment within our net environmental contribution metrics, and strengthen or reinforce this pillar out of the 5 environmental pillar we are assessing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this really is in line with, I mean, what I've mentioned before about the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which is basically an initiative which tries to standardize different recollect all together, like, you know, approaches and methodologies to assess the impact on the environmental ecosystem, which is, as I said, extremely more complicated than just considering climate. You have water, you have waste, very different aspects on that side. And so I'm glad to hear that really there is already a bit of thought in it. I was reading the documents of the TNFD, and has a roadmap, but before 2023, maybe definitions and approaches and maybe suggestion of what should the reporting framework be. It's a couple of years still, and as it is voluntary, I mean, worldwide application, it's a little bit of time, but hearing of you already setting pavement for it, it's for sure good news. Manuela, any comments on this side?
Well, just we want to share because this sense of good news, because I really get the impression that there's a lot of demands being put on the system, really, by this big effort of transitioning to net zero. But it seems like the market in its various forms, in the various asset managers, companies, data providers, are sort of really raising to the challenge, kind of coming up with more and more sophisticated and accurate ways of actually monitoring and analyzing and then planning and putting in place the strategies that need to be put in place to achieve the very ambitious objectives kind of into that being incorporated into the latest COP26 and all the previous ones before. But from that general comment, I think that the two key enablers for this process are, in order to make available the data, are on one side the work being done by EFRAG, which is the European Financial Reporting organization, which has actually started to work, which is normally works on setting the standards for financial data, and is kind of opening a new really effectively restructuring itself and reorganizing itself to make to be able to set standards and monitor standards for the so-called non-financial data, so all the sustainability, the environmental and ESG data. So that's very important work that's been done at European level to set the standards, so that disclosure from companies, which is really a bit the foundation for all this data analysis, is actually done in a standardized and more also easier to audit and check way. So that's an important element, I think. And on the other side, what I mentioned before, the ESAP, which is this European access point, which should, by making all information from companies available in a centralized way, would make it easier, and more also the whole process of data analysis and developing of methodologies and of analysis of data more transparent, because the initial input data will be available to everyone, to the broadest possible audience, and again in a standardized and hopefully monitored and auditable way. So I think these two elements are important. And also, and something I was mentioned before, I think one of the challenges will be also the coverage of this analysis, because obviously it's while it's easier and more economical to efficient from economic point of view to concentrate all this analysis on larger companies and market players, the danger is that like smaller companies will be a bit left out, because it's so that's something that has to be as a challenge that I think from all these data analysis has to be kept in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as soon as I start working on these topics 3 years ago, I had the chance to see how things develop in the discussion between companies and financial market operators in terms of data availability and quality. And in this period of time, I've had a chance to see how this debate improved, and also thanks to institutional initiatives. I would like to raise, you mentioned COP26, and I would like you to answer, maybe give your impression on what's emerged what regards climate finance in particular, which has been a point which has not been really tackled in a decisive way. Maybe do you have any? I mean, it has lights and shadows, as it's been commented widely. But do you have any comments on this specific point? Maybe Ricardo, if you have any thoughts on this, you can begin.
No, yes, you're kidding. Of course, let's say in COP26, I think that was quite impressive, the role of private capital That's I think that was one of the main differentiator of this edition compared to the other ones, where maybe whereas in the past maybe the idea was more related, the role of a game changer was more related to government and policies. Now I think that there is a very clear awareness about the power of the capital allocation in regards of tackling the climate change and all the other side issues related to the global warming, like loss in biodiversity, deforestation, and so on. So I think that especially during the finance day, as far as I remember, it was really clear the key role now that asset manager, investors, and also throughout the whole value chain, directed to the retail investor with his own personal choice in terms of putting my saving into an ESG or sustainable fund rather than in a traditional one, they can actually play a key role in getting in achieving the target. So I think that was my main takeaway from COP 2026 personally.
And any comments?
Yeah, maybe I can just add on that. I think with the financial industry now more and more committing towards climate and towards the environment, we are also at the beginning of a virtuous circle for companies also to feel that they are supported by investors for some investments that they would not have done in the past because the financial community is also setting for himself the targets and demanding targets regarding decarbonation, regarding financing the green economy, and so on and so forth. So I think it's also an encouraging signal for all the private companies that now it's a way to go, and they will get the support they need from the financial community, from the investors, and from the banks. So I think that's a positive. And a second takeaway is that I have the feeling that we have a more collaborative approach and that financial players are also willing to join forces to think about how to share good practices, to think about how to invest together in tools that are meaningful or to commit together. So that's also one of the positive. The underlying big negative is that we have seen as much private capital is needed. So it's all the gap we have to fill, which might be thought as a trigger for more, or which might be also thought has a huge gap we still have to fill in. So that's depending on how you feel, you can choose your side.
Yes, definitely. Manuela?
Well, just a quick comment. Yeah, I would agree with what my colleague was said. I think overall, apart from, as you said, the plus and minuses, lights and shadows, but overall, I would say that the direction is clear, and that just so the whole, at a global level, there is a clearer commitment, I think, and despite all the compromises, and so the fact that also private capital will have to be mobilized, and carrots and sticks will be used at a global level, I think, to go into that direction, from carbon pricing to other initiatives, the regulatory initiatives. So the direction is clear. The estimate of the amount of private capital that needs to be mobilized keeps on increasing. From what we read in the action plan with the European Commission 2 years ago to sort of the latest estimates. Every day I read a new document, this amount gets bigger. So obviously there's a huge commitment from a global level, really, of investment into this transition process. So there's just as I said, the direction is clear. A lot of work needs to be done, and hopefully everyone will do their bit.
Yes, definitely. We have a couple of questions from the audience, which I would now go to. In particular, first of all, thank you, Riccardo and Manuela, for sharing your thoughts with us and for being here with us today. As I said, a couple of questions from the audience. In particular, one is for Lennart. Lennart Spezert from Work Based on Science, which is pretty technical with respect to what you've shared before, and it's being asked, how do you assess sovereign?
Yeah, so sovereign bonds is a little more complex concept, but basically we look at the country on a per capita basis, see how many emissions per capita the country has as of now, and how they develop under baseline assumptions into the future until 2050. Then we also have the global budgets breaking down into different regions. So we have emission budgets for the OECD, for Asia, for Africa, and so on. And then can see, or can then downscale the regional emission budgets to the countries and see whether the baseline projection for the country is in line with its specific target or not. So it's essentially about comparing the budget with the target benchmark. And then, of course, the same logic applies again. If everyone followed that pathway, would we globally reach the Paris Agreement or not? So it's again a degree Celsius number that is there in the end.
Okay, yeah, pretty clear. Thanks. We have another question for Ian Standard from Agentum. It's two questions actually. And what's being asked is, since just transition is part of the COP approach, how does your gold analysis addresses PI and do not significant harm? Both, since new gold has issues with human rights at the extraction point, and the gold in circulation, the recycled gold, is changed by history also on the human rights issue. And the second question is, are you not considering scope 3 for mining gold? It was a little bit unclear from the presentation.
Yeah, no, sure. Thank you for those questions. So for this particular study, for gold, we were looking at purely at the climate impact and specifically from the emissions aspect of it. So we didn't consider other aspects of ESG in this particular study. So it was the study was sort of very clearly defined in looking at the impact of introducing gold to a portfolio and what the impact would be from a climate analysis perspective. So essentially looking at the impact on the footprint of the portfolio from an emissions perspective and its alignment to the various different climate scenarios. So that was the objective of that particular study. With regards to the scope 3 emissions were included, and that we were included those in the study. So scope 3 emissions from the mining of gold were included in there. And that's some work again we did with the World Gold Council to analyze the scope 3 emissions which were generated from the mining of gold. And as we discussed, we then sort of translated the emissions for scope 1, 2, and 3 into from the mining of gold into gold from an investor's perspective.
Okay, thanks. We have another question, which is a little bit more, I would say, general, maybe for all of you speakers and discussants. What's being asked is, what's your opinion on numerous metrics developed by private financial lobbies, such as maritime sector? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this.
Sorry, could you actually repeat which sector?
It's like maritime sector. Any of you involved in developing approaches, create metrics for carbon emission linked to financial evaluation? Okay, maybe put a little bit of thought in this. I would ask instead a question to Manuela, always from the audience. How will the cost for all this new data and methodologies will be distributed? Will this increase the cost to retail clients and clients?
Obviously, well, that's a very difficult question. I mean, it will be a cost in the system, but I obviously additional and but it's really too early to assess. So I doubt it's going to be translated directly to the final client. There's a lot of competition at the retail point, so there is reason to think that will be translated onto the final investor straight away because of the competition amongst product. There's a very broad choice. Also, the way the fact that the sustainable product are not a niche product anymore. So it's really becoming mainstream. That means that there'll be a lot of choice for investors, and the increase the transparency that we have not only at with regards to the ESG characteristic of products, but the transparency on cost that is already inbuilt in retail products would really ultimately leave the power to the retail investor to choose the product which has the best ratio of sort of price to characteristics of ESG that they prefer, that's appropriate for them. So I don't think it's a massive problem in that sense from a point of view of the final investor.
Okay. Yeah. Probably agree too with this. A little bit of justification with respect to the other question, maritime sector, I mean, was shipping industry, both via sea or via air. So if you have any, if you don't have any comments on this, and any other questions from the audience, I would leave the floor to Professor Sergio Vergalli, which is Program Director here at FEM. He wants to comment a little bit on what's being presented and said today.
My point? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate a lot. I have to say that it was very interesting to attend this conference, this workshop and conference. I have a list of some comments. So first of all, I would like to start from the goal 17. So the goal 17 now says the GCs is speaking about partnership for the goals. And so I think is one of the most important elements. So also this table today, this round table, is part of this. So when we start working on this topic, so related to sustainability, climate, and also I appreciate a lot when we speak about that. When we speak about environment, is not only climate. No, it's one of your comments. Because we speak about also about something that is more a wide idea. So we are speaking about waste, water, air quality, and so are a lot of different important elements related to this topic of today. The comment is that if we speak about methodologies and tools, that is exactly the title of this conference today, is important because it's a manner we need in order to evaluate the financial impact, but also because we understood that finance and climate is not possible to disentangle. They must be combined. It is also important for reaching some goals, also to have some measures, some metrics in order to evaluate what we are doing. Because in this manner, we are able also to collect funds, also to demonstrate which are results we are doing, and also to support exactly the initial point where I started. So exactly the partnership. Also, I appreciate a lot also the comment related to COP conference parties of 26, because again, I think in that case, looking at a more wide idea, so we were speaking about a more macroeconomic point. We faced coordination failure. It was not possible to reach a final result. There is something that is moving. There is a partnership, a possible partnership for the future. Everybody recognize that there's a problem. It's a problem in common, and everybody must move in this direction. And so I think this network, so the network that started with a theme, with a collaboration of in this that is the RISCO project. I want to thanks a lot Professor Pareglio and also Riccardo Spani for organizing all of this, and also Italian Sustainable Forum and Chapter 0 Italy for this, also all the friends that are in the network. I think that is very important, this step. This step is very important for the future, also for the present, but also for the future, for two reasons, also better, three reasons. One is that we are looking at an increase of the funds, an increase of this topic related, for example, to ESG, that is increasing a lot. So this means that we have a lot of different finance funds for improving and also solving some problem related to climate problem. In one of the biggest cases, in the majority of the cases, we understood that funds there are at the moment. We need the projects. A couple of months ago, I was the moderator of a roundtable exactly about the finance funds, and one of the problems was exactly speaking about this point. The point was in which direction we can use this money, because in order to have profitability. Profitability is also an important word that we need to combine also with climate, because everybody, when we speak about finance risk, but also opportunities, that is the title of the conference today, is very important, because opportunities means that we have to demonstrate that there is a value embedded in the financial risk. In the climate risk. Every time there is a risk, this means, according to the financial point of view, which we have also an embedded value, And if this value is used in the right manner, in the right direction, this could create an opportunity. And I think that this opportunity we need to use in order to solve a lot of different problems that are on the table, on the ground, on the table at the macroeconomic level, but also in financial level. So I think that I appreciate a lot the idea that exactly this network, the idea of this network that worked in these years. This is the fourth time that is this conference on this climate risk. According exactly to the goal 17, this means that it's very important to have a network that tries to solve and also to combine and to use same methodology, or better, to compare the different methodologies. Because collaboration means also to use the same metrics, to speak the same words, to use the same words in order to speak the same on the same table. And also looking also for the future. So for me, it's very important this point. So metrics in order to evaluate, to create value, and to demonstrate that this value is important for solving some environment, climate, water, and other elements related to problems that are sustainable problems. And I think this conference today is part of a process that can be helpful exactly in this direction, especially related to this connection, this network that you created and you day by day, year by year are developing. And I think it is very important also for the future, because for the future, for me, could be very important exactly to have a collaboration. Without this, is not possible to solve this big problem that we are facing. But also it's important to observe that which is the value that is embedded in this, and so to demonstrate. We need the matrix in order to do. And today you demonstrated that there are different methodologies in order to solve, to develop this problem. Looking at the future, I have to say that a couple of times, or better, many times during your talk, you have spoken about biodiversity. That is could be one of the topics of the future. I agree. So is a problem that appears in a lot of different representation of the future. There is this important picture, famous picture in which there are three waves. One wave is COVID-19. Second, behind, bigger, is climate change, and the last one is biodiversity. So biodiversity could be also the next step in which it is possible to work in this direction. So I don't want to waste all your time also. Because I would like to conclude. So I would like to thank you everybody for this conference, and the network also again the organization. So again Italian Sustainable Forum, Chapter 0 Italy, and also Riccardo Spani for all the managing the very well work done so far, and also Professor Pareglio for organizing all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Again, thank you everybody for participating, our guests for accepting our invitation and sharing their thoughts on this particular topic and presenting the work they're doing in this respect. And thank you to the audience for attending this conference. And obviously, again, Italian Sustainable Investment Forum and Chapter 0 Italy and all the companies of the Risco Network. I hope to see you soon again. I hope you enjoyed this conference and that you have been able to extract useful insights. So have a nice day. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend as well.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.